Hello, YouTubers. This is Gold Standards User 924 coming at you with a wrestling reimagining series for you guys today. So, we are about to get closer to the end of this WCW 1998 fantasy rebooking. So, in this installment, we are going to tackle the November pay per view known as World War III. Pay per view that was basically WCW's attempt to cash in on the Royal Rumble event that WWE had been producing. And basically, it kind of works in a similar way with the Royal Rumble. Not only is the pay per view name based on the actual match itself, but both matches consist of a bunch of multi man competitors trying to compete for an opportunity to win or to go after the World Heavyweight title at a scheduled date. So basically, you have all these competitors and works under elimination rules. So the way to win is primarily throwing your opponents over the top rope and both feet have to touch the floor. Now, unlike the Royal Rumble event, WCW's World War III, however, consists of 60 competitors rather than the 30 competitors that Royal Rumble would have. And they would divide 20 wrestlers into these three rings. And all those wrestlers, rather than having, in the Royal Rumble where WWE would have their wrestlers come out individually during each certain time interval, WCW's wrestlers would also uh, enter the ring all at once. So it does kind of get a common criticism in a way because, there's like so many competitors, so to like split the they had to split the match in like three screens. So you have like you have like a bunch of wrestlers fighting on one side, and then the other side, and then the third split screen. So it kind of came off very confusing to a lot of viewers. And the World War III event only lasted about 4 years, and then over the years they kept changing around the stipulations. Like at the first World War III, for instance, they had Randy Savage win the World Heavyweight title that was vacant at the time because of the circumstances that happened between Hogan and the Giant. So they vacated the belt and the first ever World War III match, and they would win. Not only would they win the World War III match, but they would also win the World Heavyweight title. And then the pay per views that came after that would have their wrestler earn a world title opportunity. And basically, it was just a weird mix of ideas that just came off very convoluted. And there were some World War III matches where you had to like win not only by throwing your opponent over the rope, but also by pinning or submitting your opponent. And things just kind of fell flat for WCW with the World War III experiment. That eventually they just replaced it the year after 1998. So I'm gonna try my best to book this pay per view to the best of my ability, and I would still keep the stipulation that the winner of the World War III match would go on to face the World Heavyweight Champion at Starcade. So I'm keeping that idea, and it's been a while since I actually watched this pay per view, so I was kind of looking up at the card to see what matches transpired that night and if I wanted to keep any matches on here or maybe add a little spin to it or replace a certain match with something else that's hopefully better. But yeah, so without further ado, I'm just going to kind of kick things off with an undercard match, and this would consist of two tag teams of Wrath and Mortis to take on Glacier and Ernest the Cat Miller, and they would be accompanied by Sonny Ono. So, in reality, I just noticed that prior to producing this fantasy booking, I was looking up at the card, and it turns out that there was a match between Wrath and Glacier that started off the match. So what I would do instead is produce a tag team match. So I have Wrath and Mortis, who never split up in my universe. So Mortis never went to become Chris Canyon, at least at this point in time. While Glacier and Ernest Miller, who were basically going to come off as the heels as these two martial arts wrestlers, and they would, Sonny Ono, given his martial arts background as well, would manage those two wrestlers. And they've actually had a few series of matches prior at Bash at the Beach, for instance. But this time the roles are kind of reversed. So Glacier and Ernest Miller were like faces, and Wrath and Morris were heels. So going into 1998, the roles are reversed. So Wrath and Morris are the face, Glacier and the Cat are the heels. So try to kind of keep it the idea sort of fresh, despite the fact that these two teams have fought each other on a number of occasions. This wouldn't be necessarily a long match of sorts, but Wrath and Morris are going to go over Glacier and Ernest Miller. Really try to put over Wrath and Morris as this big powerhouse tag team, and really kind of, just make the tag team division looking strong. And, let's see what we go from here, and kind of give them a little, some pay-per-view time, and try to give those two tag teams a rub. So Wrath and Morris are going to go over Glacier and the Cat in the process. And then we have is the television title, Booker T taking on Chris Jericho. You might notice Booker T is the one holding the belt rather than Chris Jericho. So, long story short, Booker T would win the TV title match on Nitro against Chris Jericho. There would be some interference going on with the Horsemen and the Dungeon. And we're kind of get a little more into detail regarding the Horsemen and the Dungeon later on in the video. So, but basically, their involvement are going to allow Booker T to take the advantage, and Jericho's just distracted because there's just so much outside interference, and the referees just there would be like a ref bump along the way, so referees like so dazed and confused and doesn't realize what's going on. But Booker T is going to find a way to defeat Chris Jericho to win the TV title. So Chris Jericho eventually gets so infuriated by the loss and saying that how he was screwed, that this is all conspiracy, blah 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 blah. And then he goes, he goes to J.J. Dillon and starts to negotiate a rematch clause, and willing to regain the TV title belt. He felt he was screwed, felt that he lost the belt prematurely. So eventually, J.J. Dillon will agree, but in one condition, that if either of the two factions get involved in any shape or form, Jericho would not only get disqualified, but uh, he wouldn't get his hands on the TV title belt as long as Booker's the champion. So it doesn't necessarily have to be Jericho being disqualified, but if Jericho loses the match in any shape or form as well, so even if he loses clean, the stipulation would still apply. So Jericho can't go after the TV title, with Booker still being the champion. So eventually, Jericho reluctantly agrees, and they will have the match at World War III. So Booker T is going to go over Chris Jericho and retaining the TV title. So so Booker T's really been on a roll since starting out as a singles competitor, and there will be a sign of things to come for Booker T, and as well as Chris Jericho. So I'm not de-pushing him or anything, but I have plans for him though. Um, so that goes my second match. The third match I would have is the Cruiserweight title bout between the champion Billy Kidman defending the belt against Juventud Guerrera. So this is basically the match that they did at World War III, and I would actually keep this match. Really cool stuff that they did. So I'm not going to reiterate too much. Um, so if you haven't seen that match that they had at World War III, I suggest you check it out. It was just off the chain, and I would definitely keep this match. And Billy Kidman is going to go over Juventud Guerrera and retaining his Cruiserweight title. Then we have is another title bout that involves the United States Championship. So Perry Saturn goes in as the champion, taking on Scott Steiner. Uh, Definitely not as much build up, really, but Saturn's been on a tear going after the NWO for a number of months. Scott Steiner starts to take notice of this, and eventually inserts himself in a feud with Perry Saturn. So Scott Steiner's going to go really try to cement Scott Steiner into this big powerhouse monster. And, Scott Steiner is just taking notice on Perry Saturn and seeing how he's managing to hold on his own ever since he broke away from Raven. And Steiner's just kind of like the obstacle in Perry Saturn. So he's going to do whatever it takes to dethrone Perry Saturn because he's just been plowing through a lot of the B team members of the NWO. But Scott Steiner is pretty much another story because he's been on a tear ever since he went as far as taking Lex Luger out of action. And Scott's just doing what he can, willing to collect some gold in the NWO, and they would eventually have the match. Hard fought bout. Wouldn't necessarily be as long as Kidman and Guerrera, but at least a fair amount of time to the point where Saturn could beat Steiner, but despite the efforts, Scott Steiner's gonna find a way to pop back up and basically win with the Steiner recliner submission hold, and Steiner would walk away as the new United States champion. And then we have is hair versus hair between Eddie Guerrero and Chavo Guerrero Jr. So if you watch my Halloween Havoc card from the previous installment, Chavo Guerrero ended up picking up a winning upset over Eddie Guerrero. And Eddie Guerrero is just so pissed off. He attacks Chavo and, giving us an excuse to continue on with the feud. So eventually, Chavo accepts the rematch, but this time, Eddie says that, you want to, if I want to face you, I'm going to have to shave your head. So, I know it's just kind of crappy delivery there. Um, yeah, so we're going to do hair versus hair. And it's basically the match that you saw from Bash at the Beach. So, same concept. Eddie Guerrero's going to go over Chavo Guerrero, get his win back. And even though Eddie's willing to shave Chavo Guerrero's hair, Chavo ends up shaving his own hair anyways. So we would keep that stuff. This was definitely a very underrated feud. So should have been talked about more, in my opinion. But yeah, definitely one of the bright spots of 1998 that didn't involve the NWO. So uh, Eddie Guerrero's going to go over Chavo Guerrero. So I definitely have plans for Eddie Guerrero. And then we have is Diamond Dallas Page taking on Bret Hart. Another match like Kidman and Guerrera that happened at the actual World War III that I'm also going to keep on this card. So only difference is that there's no title belts involved. So and basically what's going to happen here is if you watched in my card for Halloween Havoc, uh, Bret Hart interfered in the match, and J.J. Dillon had stipulated in that Halloween Havoc main event that if any member of the NWO interferes in any way, shape, or form, then Hogan would lose the World Heavyweight title belt and, basically award it to DDP in the process. But, Bret Hart and Chris Jericho and Jim Neidhart all interfere in the match. And, they're not even associated with the NWO, so J.J. Dillon just wasn't exactly as clear as he thought he was. But that allows Hulk Hogan to pick up the victory, and DDP just end up coming up short thanks to Bret's interference. So yeah, so Bret Hart's just still very bitter about how he should have been the number one contender for Hogan's world title, and the fact that DDP won for War Games when Bret Hart felt like he should have been the one awarded the title shot. So he's pretty much taking his frustrations on DDP, and and because DDP's been labeled as the People's Champion, Bret Hart feeling that he should be the People's Champion because he was the reason why that a point in time when Hogan didn't even have the world title, that the NWO didn't even have any gold around their waist. So what about me? Not to make a Raven quote exactly, but But that sort of build up eventually escalates into this match at World War III. DDP is going to go over Bret Hart. And then we have is the tag team title bout with Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko defending as the champions, taking on the Outsiders, taking on Scott Norton and Brian Adams. So Benoit and Malenko ended up going over the Outsiders in a match that looked like they were going to lose, but eventually makes this underdog Cinderella story comeback, and Benoit and Malenko retain the tag title belts. And there's a little bit of a rift going on within the NWO, and the Outsiders had Vincent accompany them to the ring, but something that I didn't really explain in my previous card, where in the weeks building up to the tag team title match, you had Vincent was managing a number of members in the NWO, especially the tag team of Scott Norton and Brian Adams, and he's also been accompanying Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Say that they were gonna go after Benoit Malenko, despite the fact that Arn Anderson's gonna be there to accompany them, by especially managing them at ringside, and Vincent is just trying to squeeze in because they feel that Scott Hall and Nash need his help, and that they would that because it's the NWO, so obviously they would do whatever it takes, especially if they have to resort to dirty tactics. But Hall and Nash refused to have Vincent's help; that they could decimate Benoit Malenko, or as Kevin Nash would dub them as vanilla midgets. Vincent ended up accompanying the Outsiders anyway, but even despite doing all he can to help them, it just ended up screwing them over in the long run. So Benoit Malenko had retained the tag team title belts. So Hall and Nash are just infuriated at Vincent, and willing to get a rematch. And under this condition that Vincent wouldn't be accompanying Hall and Nash in the rematch if they were gonna go after Benoit and Malenko. So eventually, Vincent makes a deal and goes over to JJ Dillon, brings in Scott Norton and Brian Adams, who had been consistently winning matches, even though they aren't presented heavily on pay-per-views. But they've still been dominant on Thunder and Saturday Night. Scott Norton and Brian Adams are looking pretty consistent, and especially in a promo where the Outsiders interrupt a speech that Chris and Wall and Dean Malenko conduct regarding about their opponents for World War III. So eventually, this leads to having Scott Norton and Brian Adams ambush the tag team champions. So this kind of all culminates into a match at World War III, which would be a triangle match, obviously, and and basically putting up the odds against Benoit and Malenko, and that they could potentially lose the tag title belts in this sort of scenario, because you have two teams that are not only heels, but they're also members of the NWO, and eventually Benoit and Malenko are gonna find a way to overcome the odds, and basically Benoit would lock in the crossface on Scott Norton to retain the tag team title belts. So yeah, so there's gonna be a lot of dissension going on between two NWO teams. So it's time for our main event, which will consist of a World War III match. So 3 rings, 60 competitors. Winner of that bout will go on to become the number one contender for Hogan's World Title belt at Starrcade. And basically, all you need to know is that the final 4 wrestlers will consist of Goldberg, Diamond Dallas Page, The Giant, and Kevin Nash. So notable moments, you would have Goldberg clear out 1 ring, as well as Giant and Kevin Nash, which will also clear out their own respective rings. And DDP would still be there. Goldberg and Giant, Kevin Nash would be the notable MVPs of this match that would have the most elimination. But DDP manages to barely survive. And now, aside from DDP, the rest of the remaining competitors consist of giant powerhouse competitors. So, utilizing their star power, they go at it, and DP and Giant will eventually eliminate each other.
And I'm going to plan on setting up a feud down the road as a result of the double elimination with Page and Giant. So eventually, this would come down to Goldberg and Kevin Nash, and they both have a bit of a stare down in the center of the ring. And the announcers really try to put it over as to see one of these guys will go after the world title. And up to this point, a lot of the wrestlers that won World War III have affiliated themselves with the New World Order. So they've really been also on a winning track record as far as World War III victories are concerned. So they can make this like three in a row. The bottom line is that Goldberg and Kevin Nash are gonna square off, and they're gonna have a good 5 minutes or so just duking at it, just going back and forth. And Goldberg's gonna eliminate Kevin Nash, throwing him over the rope, allowing Goldberg to pick up the victory and win the World War III match. So now he has an opportunity to face Hulk Hogan the following month at Starcade. Goldberg would just basically look up at the cameraman and just really use all his enthusiasm to really shout to Hulk Hogan and telling that he's next. And that's how you end the pay per view. And basically, the main event set Goldberg versus Hogan at the December pay per view, the biggest pay per view event that WCW's had, basically their version of WrestleMania, and obviously that's Starcade. So, yes. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Tell me what you think about this card. So stay tuned as we book the 12th and final installment in this WCW 1998 rebooking. So it's been a wild ride, and hopefully I end the last installment with a bang. So stick around for that. And until next time, this is Gold Standard User 924 signing out.